Chapter 68. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The starved girl. The cold water from the mountain spring poured from the leather water sack and wet the towel. Shu Huan used the wet towel to wipe the girl's face. As a result, a childish, delicate and pretty face was revealed from under the mud. She looked like the same age as Gu Shihe. The girl no longer struggled, but when people approached her, she would subconsciously curl up shivering. Only, those eyes of hers were staring at the weaved basket next to the fire. Inside there was the leftover of the roasted rabbit. Shu Huan sighed secretly. Could it be that this girl continuously sneaked inside in the middle of the night just to find a chance to steal something to eat? What exactly had happened to her family? Why was a child of about 10 years wandering alone in a forest and starved till she was only skin and bones? While she was thinking, she saw that Ji Danqing had already taken out the rabbit meat from the basket and roasted it on the fire. It didn't take long before the meat was overflowing with a delicious scent. In fact, roasting things in the middle of the night was a very dangerous thing. No one knew if this would attract hungry wild animals. But everything grew in the summer. There was sufficient food. The probability of such a thing happening was very small. Hence, Du Qiu only frowned slightly but didn't stop Ji Danqing. Shu Huan clearly saw that when the delicious scent appeared, the girl's eyes lit up. There was also a flame of hunger and eagerness leaped inside of those eyes. Her body trembled slightly as if she was enduring her hardest. Finally, she couldn't hold back anymore, reached out and wanted to snatch the roasted rabbit in Ji Danqing's hands. Gu Shiran was sharp-sighted and deftly slapped her hands away. He reprimanded, "Are you not afraid to burn your hands?" The girl looked once at him while biting her lips. She didn't say anything, but her eyes revealed 70% of disappointment and 30% of anger. She looked like a little beast whose food had been taken from her mouth. She only lacked revealing her teeth and claws and growl at Gu Shiran. Gu Shiran laughed, "You want to bite me?" While talking, he took the roasted rabbit meat from Ji Danqing and waved it in front of her. "First, tell me your name, where you live and why you are alone in the mountain. You can eat after that." The girl looked at the roasted rabbit meat. Her eyes drooled at it, but when she looked at Gu Shiran, it turned into hatred. In the end, she turned her head and still bit her lips. She didn't want to say a word. She had been like this from the beginning. No matter what they asked, she refused to answer. Now, she even refused the food she longed for. They didn't know what kind of pain she was concealing in her heart that she was unable to say. "Don't bully a little child," Shu Huan sighed once again. "If she doesn't want to talk, then wait a bit more." After the words fell, she looked down and saw the girl twist her hands. She grabbed the girl's hands and used the water from the leather water sack to clean them. But the washed water was muddy like oil. Her hands were several times dirtier than her face. Her nails were full of black dirt. It was difficult to clean it at once. Shu Huan could only casually wash it for her a bit and then handed her the roasted rabbit. The just roasted rabbit was a bit hot, but that girl didn't care. The moment the roasted rabbit was handed to her, she took a bite. When the teeth were exposed, they shone brightly under the light of the fire. Gu Shihe looked frowningly at her eating appearance and muttered, "How come she is like a hungry wolf?" She was really like a hungry wolf. The leftover rabbit meat was wolfed down by her in just a moment. Even the cartilage had been chewed and swallowed into her stomach. Even like this, she still had a look that she wasn't sated. While she licked her fingers, she looked around to see whether there were still things to eat. It seemed that she had starved for a long time. She shouldn't have eaten too greasy things and shouldn't eat too much at once. Shu Huan handed her the leather water sack that Du Qiu had filled once more. "You can't eat any more. Drink some water." The girl looked once at her. She wasn't willing to give up and continued to search with her eyes. Until when she discovered that there was nothing more to eat here did she disappointingly take over the leather water sack. She raised her head and poured all the water into her stomach. Only now did the ferociousness of the wolf fade away and restored her calm look. She sat constrained at the fire and stared at them with vigilance. Hey! Gu Shiha used a twig to point at her. You are done eating. Can you talk now? The girl ignored him. She lowered her head and didn't even look at him. Gu Shiha was a bit angry. What is this? It is as if we are bad people and have bad intentions towards you. We gave you food and you aren't even willing to answer some questions. The girl lowered her head even more. In short, she didn't open her mouth no matter what. Ji Danqing looked at the clothes on her body, shook his head and said, she presumably had stayed alone in the mountain for several months. She still wore the lined jacket of early spring. While he talked, he got closer to her and said warmly, little girl, can I take a look to see whether you are injured? Ji Danqing was a gentle and warm person like jade. When speaking, he usually gave the feeling of peace and tranquility. No matter whether you looked at him from the top to the bottom or from the bottom to the top, no one would classify him as someone bad. However, when this girl heard him talking, it didn't eliminate her vigilance. Instead she clung on her clothes and moved backwards. The raised eyes were full of fear and disgust, making the heart of the people go cold. For the time being, it seemed that they wouldn't get anything out of her. Xu Huan thought for a moment and said, forget it. You all go to sleep. I will look after her. Previously, she referred to herself as Big Sister when she talked to the girl and revealed her identity of a female. Hence, the girl slightly accepted her approach and didn't show a strong disgust and resistance. Gu Shiran frowned and said, you already kept watch for half a night. Can you still take it? I'm good. If I get really sleepy, I will wake you up. While Xu Huan talked, she reached out and gently grasped the girl's hand. She felt the girl's body trembled a bit, but she barely resisted herself from struggling. Hence, Xu Huan also didn't speak and accompanied her next to the fire. After Gu Shiha lay down, he pulled a face at that girl. As a result, his head was knocked by Gu Shiran. Hence, he could only obediently lay on his back and close his eyes. However, he felt very excited that there was a strange and mysterious girl here. How could he still fell asleep? From time to time, he would sneak a peek at that girl. When their gazes accidentally met, he would raise an eyebrow, glare at her and deliberately used his hand to fan in front of his nose with a look of disgust. It was obviously that he was trying to embarrass the girl for being dirty and stinky. Naturally, the girl wouldn't bother with him. She only lowered her head and bit her lips silently. Xu Huan couldn't stand it anymore. She very unladylike gave Gu Shiha the middle finger. The meaning of the contempt was very obvious. It happened that Gu Shiha didn't care about being despised and excitedly asked her, second sister. In law, what is the meaning of giving one the middle finger? How could Xu Huan know he would ask that? Her tongue was immediately tied. Then, she saw that Gu Shiran reached out and pressed Gu Shiha's head to the ground. He warned Gu Shiha fiercely, the meaning is that if you don't sleep now, we will leave you alone on the mountain to feed the wolves. This explanation. Xu Huan was embarrassed again and looked speechless at the sky. She didn't notice that the corners of the girl's lips curled up slightly. The fisted hand that had been forcibly grasped by Xu Huan also relaxed slightly. Chapter 69. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Inadvertently peeping at a bath. The herbs that Ji Danqing found were very effective. The swelling of Xu Huan's ankle had disappeared the day before. When she stood up and walked early in the morning, she didn't feel much pain. Hence, she urged Gu Shiran to let's go home. It wasn't that she wanted to go back to the resort, but it was because when they went out, they had said that they would only stay for one night. Although, Gu Shiran later added that they may delay for a day or two, but today was already the 5th day after they went to the mountain. If they don't go back, presumably those old maids and maids would lose their cool and report to old madam. Of course, the little girl that they caught last night was also one of the reasons that she was eager to go back. When the sky was beginning to become bright, she had already taken the girl to a secluded place to check her. She discovered that there were countless of wounds and injuries on her body. Only a few were old injuries. Most of them were bruises from falling and scratches. The most serious wound was the wound in her lower leg. It already festered and formed pus. Half of the lower leg was swollen and gave off a rotten smell. When Ji Danqing heard Shu Huan talk about the wound, he couldn't help but shook his head. It should be really hard on her. She was so seriously injured and still ran so fast last night. However, if this leg is not treated in time, presumably, in the future. He didn't continue, but the meaning was obvious. Shu Huan had used all tricks, but she couldn't get anything out of the girl. She didn't know her name or where she lived. She decided to first bring her back to the resort and treat her injuries before they decide the next step. Anyway, Gu household supported many idlers. If there was no place for this girl to go back, she would just take her as a maid. They didn't expect that the moment the girl heard that they wanted to bring her back down the mountain, she panicked and scrambled like a rabbit. Her speed was very fast. If Du Qiu wasn't here, no one would be able to catch her. With Du Qiu here, her resistance and struggles were powerless. Soon, she was caught and brought back. It was just that they spent a lot of effort by going down the mountain with her. When they almost reached the foot of the mountain, they were surprised to see Ranmo and Dian coming with people to search for them. When they, RD, saw them, Ranmo was overflowed with emotions and his tears fell. He said while sobbing, Fourth young master, you finally came down the mountain, you really made tis little one anxious. Dian also cried, so great. Fourth young master didn't die. He hadn't finished crying yet when he was kicked by Gu Shihe, who said angrily, who died? I'm living very well. Don't curse me for nothing. Even Ranmo fisted him 2 times, do you know how to talk? It turned out that when Shu Huan and the others didn't return after the planned date, the people of the resort truly got anxious. They just feared that it was false alarm and didn't dare to go report to old madam. Until today, concubine Yun couldn't wait any longer. She let Ranmo and Dian go up the mountain with people to find them and see why they delayed. After that would she decide whether she should send people back to report to the household. Alright, they let people get anxious for nothing. However, Shu Huan didn't feel any guilt this time. She turned to look at Gu Shihe and saw him lower his head dejectedly. She couldn't be blamed for being pushed and having injured her ankle. With Ranmo, Dian and the others coming at their rescue, they could take turns to carry that little girl. The journey went a lot smoother. The group returned quickly to Moon's View Resort. When concubine Yun and Mother Du heard the news, they rushed out to greet them. Their faces were full of relief. Without taking a break, Ji Danqing brought the little girl back to Bamboo Pavilion. However, she cried and struggled. Shu Huan could only accompany them and kept comforting her, Dr. Ji is a good person. He will treat the injury on your leg. Don't be afraid. The girl didn't speak and still cried, but she reached out and tightly grabbed Shu Huan. Shu Huan immediately understood her and quickly said, rest assured. I will stay with you. It may hurt a bit when the injury is being treated, but if you don't treat it, it will affect your walking in the future. Hence, it must be treated. Please, believe us that we wouldn't harm you. She didn't know whether the girl had understood or not, but the crying voice obviously turned weaker. However, the strength that grabbed her, had doubled. Shu Huan sighed. The wounds of the outside were easy to treat. After treating the wound and medicine was applied, the wound would heal in a few days. However, the psychological trauma was difficult to cure. This girl seemed to have received a big psychological blow. For someone to survive for so long on the mountain, she must be traumatized. Otherwise she wouldn't not talk no matter what. It was afternoon when they returned to Moon View's resort. When Shu Huan came out of Bamboo Pavilion, the moon was already in the sky and the sky was full of stars. The whole day, she only ate 2 snacks. However, when she looked at the process of the treatment, her stomach turned. Although she was hungry, she didn't have any appetite. She only felt very exhausted. She raised her head, took a few deep breaths and said to Mei Jing, who walked next to her, "Go and choose a quick-witted and diligent maid to take care of that child. When she woke up, make some porridge for her, but don't let her eat too much. I will go to the hot spring to take a shower. After you are done with the task, bring me some clean clothes." Mei Jing promised and went away. Shu Huan walked in the direction of the hot spring. It wasn't convenient to bathe in the mountain. She hadn't bathed for so many days. Now, she felt that her body was sweaty and dirty. She couldn't stand it anymore and just wanted to take off her clothes, jump in the water to wash herself thoroughly. However, she didn't expect that in the hot spring that only had been used by her nearby Japanese rose building, there was someone soaking in it now. Looking at that graceful back, it was a girl. Unfortunately, when she wanted to retreat, that girl heard footsteps and turned around. The moonlight was bright like mercury pouring down in torrents. Shu Huan clearly saw that clear as ice and clean as jade appearance of that girl. Going down the neck, the shoulder, down the shoulder was. This situation was too embarrassing. If she looked more, her eyes would be pricked. She quickly turned her head and wanted to apologize, but that girl was faster than her. She hugged her body and screamed. Her voice was like an ice blade and hurt her eardrums. Then, there were rapid footsteps outside of the rose fence. This girl was still screaming, "Get out! Get out!" Someone unfamiliar dressed like a maid rushed in. When she saw Shu Huan, she let out a cold breath. She didn't beg for forgiveness or reproach and only fiercely grabbed Shu Huan by her hair. That girl wept behind them and said ruthlessly, "Let 2 people block her mouth and beat him until he is deaf." Shu Huan's expression immediately darkened. The body of women of this era was precious. Not even a little could be leaked outside. She didn't look at it deliberately. Moreover, the both of them were women. It didn't matter if she saw it. Was it so grave that she needed to be beaten to death? Aside from this, there was a more important issue. Who was this woman? Inexplicable, she was in her private hot spring. She didn't hold her accountable yet for tainting the water. Why did the other party have the courage to punish her first? She was angry, but when she was dragged outside of the rose fence, she suddenly realized the reason that girl would be so agitated. After she returned, she went to Bamboo Pavilion and hadn't gone back to Japanese Rose Building. Hence, she was still dressed like a manservant. That girl presumably mistook her for a manservant. It was normal for her to be agitated and angry after her body was seen by a man. Chapter 70. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The overbearing maid. Since it was a misunderstanding, it would be fine if she just explained. While Shu Huan was immersed in her thoughts, the maid that dragged her out was already scolding another little maid who came with a tray. "I told you to go bring some sour plum soup and you vanished. Why did you still return? Why didn't you continue to go play?" The little maid said terrified, "Big sister Peiyu, I didn't go play. The cook had used all the ice. I was waiting for the housekeeper to open the ice house. This is why." That Peiyu interrupted her impatiently, "All right, you don't have to say more. Put the tray down and go call Nanny Guan. If you're late again, wait to be beaten." The little maid looked once timidly at Shu Huan, then if Nanny Guan asks what the matter is, what do I say? Peiyu stomped her feet from impatience, "Say that there is an urgent matter and let her bring 2 guards. Go quickly." The little maid put the tray on the flat ground and walked away slowly. Shu Huan didn't know if she was originally slow like this or that she was deliberately going against Peiyu, but that slow appearance made Peiyu furious. She shouted at her, "Run! Oh, that little maid began to slowly run. Peiyu looked at her back and gritted her teeth for quite a while. Then, she turned and swept once over Shu Huan. She threw the handkerchief that she had twisted into a ball at Shu Huan and coldly said, "Block your mouth yourself. If you let a word out about what had happened just now, my miss will let you die even more miserably." When the handkerchief flew over, it brought a strong fragrant wind. Shu Huan didn't know how many aromas was used on it, but it made her sneeze twice. She didn't take joy in self-abuse, how could she do as the maid say? She only looked ridiculously at the handkerchief in her hand and said, "The embroidery is very delicate, but I think you have misunderstood. I didn't peek at your miss taking a bath because I am also a..." The word girl hasn't been said yet when Peiyu's willow-leaf-shaped eyebrows rose. She took the handkerchief back. And fiercely interrupted her, a filthy servant with other thoughts. Don't you know what kind of place here is? After doing such a shameless thing, you still dare to say that it is a misunderstanding. Could it be that when your second young mistress is at home, you would also walk in openly like this? Looking at her overbearing appearance, those who didn't know would think that she was the master and not the servant. Shu Huan got a bit impatient, raised an eyebrow and said, "Of course. I am. She is Gu household's second young mistress. Wasn't walking openly into the hot spring a very normal thing?" However, it seemed that Peiyu had the habit of only listening to half of what others had to say, and she also liked to interrupt people. She, P, didn't wait for her to finish when she, P, spit on her and said, "I didn't think that your Gu household hid dirt and accept wrongdoings like this." What was she, P, thinking about? Shu Huan felt that it was laughable. She couldn't help but straighten her face and said, "Are such words something you should say?" There was reproach in her tone and she was cool and collected, which startled Peiyu. Then, she answered with an even colder voice, "What if I had said them?" Shu Huan raised her eyes. With the help of the light of the lanterns hung on the trees, she saw that the girl who was soaking in the hot spring just now had walked out dressed neatly. Her face was cold like ice and she had an arrogant aura. She glanced scornfully at Shu Huan and reprimanded Peiyu, "Why are you still here? Why didn't you slap his mouth? Are you still waiting for me to argue with this dirty slave?" Shu Huan was dressed like a servant and looked very young. Her body was thin and didn't look like someone who could counterattack. Hence, Peiyu went forward and raised her hand. A slap went to Shu Huan's face. If she had wanted to explain before, but now, Shu Huan was already angry from being entangled. She had never seen such a master and servant who liked to rebuke people and would beat someone without having made the matter clear. Therefore, when she saw Peiyu's slap come at her, she dodged and then reached out her foot under Peiyu's foot. This maid stumbled and almost fell. Shu Huan took a deep breath. It seemed that she didn't stay for nothing on the mountain these past few days. She had learned some kung fu from Du Qiu to defend herself. Although, it was without much substance, but the effect was remarkable when being used at this moment. It wasn't easy for Peiyu to stabilize her body. She turned her head and glared angrily at her, "You." This time, it was Shu Huan's turn to interrupt her, "What you? Before you hit people, you should wait till you have understood the matter." While talking, she took off the hat on her head. Hair fell down. She put the hair behind her ears and revealed her earlobe. She pointed at the hole on it and said, "Every time, when I wanted to explain, I was interrupted by you. Did you see now? I am a girl. Just now, I didn't know that there was someone inside. That was why I went in. I didn't mean to offend. If you are angry, I can apologize. I'm sorry. Please, forgive my unintentional behavior." After she apologized, she saw that the master and servant were staring blankly at her. She said, "If there is nothing else, can I leave now?" After the girl heard that, she was astounded. Then, she was greatly relieved. However, That neither servile nor overbearing attitude of Shu Huan made her very uncomfortable. Hence, she said with a cold face, "Why does Gu household have such an unruly thing like you? Sneaked in while I was bathing and hit my maid. Isn't apologize enough? When would this be over?" Shu Huan pressed down her anger and said frowningly, "Then, what do you want?" That girl said arrogantly, "Kneel and kowtow 3 times at me. And then, go to you housekeeper to receive 40 beatings." Shu Huan looked silently at her. In fact, she had already guessed it. To be able to act so arrogantly here, see herself as the master of this resort and could punish servants randomly, aside from the legitimate daughter of Zhang family that Gu Shiha mentioned, Gu Shiran's little cousin sister, who else could it be? However, she didn't expect that after the matter was explained, the other party was still unwilling to forgive. It was impossible for her to kneel and kowtow. If she revealed her identity of Gu household's second young mistress now, it would undoubtedly be a slap in Zhang Hanfang's face, sweep her prestige completely and let her have no way out of this embarrassment. It would be difficult to say what kind of reaction she would have by then. Perhaps, she would make the matter even bigger. Shu Huan was still hesitating when Zhang Hanfang couldn't wait anymore and yelled, "Kneel." "Why should I?" Shu Huan raised her head and swept tauntingly at Peiyu. "If you want to punish me, why don't you first punish your maid? If it wasn't because she didn't keep watch outside, how would I know that there was someone inside and entered? Moreover, it was she who first wanted to slap me. I only dodged. I didn't hurt her at all." Originally, Peiyu was secretly rejoicing that this person wasn't a man. Otherwise, she wouldn't escape the crime of being negligent afterwards. What was more was that knowing that their Mrs. Body had seen by a man was a big crime. It would be strange if she wasn't made mute and sold or secretly killed. Hence, she was rejoicing relaxed at other people's misfortune. She didn't expect that Shu Huan would put the fire on her body. When she saw that the gaze that Zhang Hanfang swept at her was with resentment, she couldn't help but quiver from fear. However, no one knew the master better than the servant. She knew that Zhang Hanfang was someone who liked to have face. She must let her get some face back first and to vent her anger. Then, she, could handle her, easier later. Hence, she braced herself and said, "Whether to punish me or not is my Mrs. matter. You have no right to meddle. First, kneel before our miss before we continue to talk." Chapter 71. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hopelessly entangled when handling matters, one should leave some leeway. Shu Huan no longer thought about making her identity known at this moment. Zhang Hanfang was a granddaughter at old madam watched grow up. Naturally, her place was heavier than her in old madam's heart. Moreover, there would inevitably be interactions between relatives in the future. There was no need to make things too stiff between them. Zhang Hanfang would get to know her identity someday, but it was the best if it was not now and also not made known by herself. As for whether the other party, after getting to know her identity would understand that she already left some leeway and wouldn't mention this matter anymore, was not something that she could control. She had to be in the right first. In the future, she would counter every trick. No one would be able to pick her fault by them. Even old madam would be clear about her concession. Thinking till here, Shu Huan didn't want to argue with her even more. She only said, "I will go get my punishment at second young masters now. Miss should go back and rest." Having said that, she turned and left. She wanted to escape from this quarrel. Who knew that Peiyu harbored hard feelings? Therefore, she sourly instigated, "Miss, is she saying that you can't meddle in Gu household's affair?" Zhang Hanfang only took Shu Huan as a maid. She had long been dissatisfied with her attitude of not fawning, not obeying, not currying favor and also contradicting her. After Peiyu said that, she felt that she had lost face and angrily yelled, "Stop! Who would bother with you?" Originally, Shu Huan was walking fast. Hearing her yell, she run. 30.6 Stratagems. Retreat was the best stratagem. If she couldn't afford to offend, then, she could dodge, right? She didn't believe that a lady like Zhang Hanfang who cared about style when walking and sitting would chase after her. The unfortunate thing was that Zhang Hanfang didn't chase after her, but there were others who would. At this time, that little maid already brought Nanny Guan and 2 guards of Zhang family. Seeing that their miss was stopping a servant, they didn't ask what the matter was and chased after Xu Huan. While chasing, they also raged of anger. Are you deaf? Our miss said for you to stop. She was about to die. These people are not finished yet. Xu Huan was afraid that after she was caught up with, she would be tangled for a long time by that Zhang Hanfang again. Therefore, she ran even faster. Fortunately, Japanese Rose Building was not far away. She will reach it if she run a short distance. Moreover, Gu Shiran was afraid that she would fall when walking at night. He very considerately hung lanterns every few meters. Even if she run now in the dark, she could move like an escaping rabbit. In fact, this road was rather tortuous. She stumbled a lot and it happened that behind her there was 1 girl and 2 men. They were like wild gooses flying to the south. Lined up they formed the letter Z. The only dejected thing was that her ankle hadn't been completely healed yet. After tiring for a whole day, she was exhausted. Hence, the safety distance was shortened bit by bit and she was soon caught up. At this time, a small figure appeared in the front of the road. When Xu Huan took a closer look, she was overjoyed. She rushed over, grabbed that figure and said, "Good Mei Jing, block a moment for me." Mei Jing came to send her clothes. She was puzzled when she saw Xu Huan full of sweat from running. Just when she wanted to ask what had happened, Xu Huan already ran to her. Then, the 3 people that chased behind her also caught up. Seeing that she, was blocking in the middle of the road, they reached out and impatiently pushed her. She was pushed to the side of road like a spinning top. Only now did she realize that second young mistress was running to escape. Heavens! Where did such daring servants came from to dare to be rude to second young mistress? She got anxious and shouted, "Hey!" a few times. She wanted to call those people back. However, no one bothered with her. She could only stomp her feet and followed suit. Xu Huan didn't know what happened behind her. She just ran away. Her heart just let a sigh of relief when she saw that Japanese Rose Building was in the front, but those 2 guards rushed to her one after another. They blocked her road and forced her to stop. Immediately afterwards, Nanny Guan also caught up. She bent over to gasp for 2 breaths and then twisted Xu Huan's arm without a word. Then, she said, follow me back to see Miss. Let go. Nanny Guan was big and sturdy. The strength she used to twist people's arm was very great. Xu Huan frowned from pain. Being yelled at by her, Nanny Guan was startled for a moment. She looked closely at her and discovered that she was a girl. She immediately raised her hand and gave her a slap. She also scolded, "Thief maid, did you eat the gut of a leopard? The more I shout, the harder you ran. Follow me now to Miss to receive your punishment." Xu Huan's arm was twisted. It was inconvenient to dodge. Although, she avoided being hit on her face, but the slap fell on her neck. There was a burning pain coming from there. She immediately got angry, lifted her foot and slammed it down. Nanny Guan had been stepped on and was forced to let go. She immediately bent down, hugged her leg and screamed. Xu Huan didn't look at her at all, turned around and looked at the 2 guards in front of her, "Make way." When the guards saw that she was so bold, they didn't know who she was relying on and hesitated. Nanny Guan immediately shouted, "Drag her back." The 2 guards were just about to do that when they heard a lazy and low voice, "Who do you want to drag back?" Nanny Guan looked up and saw that it was Gu Household's Gu Shiran. Although, he was somewhat different from when she saw him in the past, but the outline of his face didn't change that much. Hence, she could still recognize him. She softened her voice and smiled. This maid offended our miss. I want to take her back to receive her punishment. I didn't want to alarm second young master. I apologize for my offense. While talking, she still wanted to reach out to drag Shu Huan. She said, second young master, go back and rest. We will leave now. Gu Shiran narrowed his eyes slightly and said faintly angered, who is your miss? Who are you? Nanny Guan's hand stiffened in the air. After being blank for a moment, she laughed, second young master, you are an eminent person that has a short memory. Our miss is your paternal little cousin sister. I am Mrs. Nanny. That's right, you went out for many days and didn't know that we are here. Gu Shiran came to the realization and nodded, Zhang family's little cousin sister. I remember. Nanny Guan sighed of relief and smiled fawningly, that is right. That is right. We are from Zhang household. Hearing her answer, Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow, then, I have to hear. How come your Zhang household's people would manage my Gu household's maid? Nanny Guan didn't expect that he would ask such a sharp question in a blink of an eye. She immediately choked on her words. It happened that she truly didn't know how Shu Huan had offended Zhang Hanfang. She could only say vaguely, no matter what, our miss is a guest. It's not good to slight her. She dared to disrespect our miss. After disrespecting, she didn't apologize and run. These words were obviously to point out for Gu Shiran that they are the guests and that he should respect them. Shu Huan was in the right now, and she also had been irritated by that slap. After hearing that, she became angrier. How would she leave a leeway for this nanny? She said, if I don't run, should I wait to be beaten to death by you? While talking, it was as if she wished for the world to be in chaos and pushed away the two guards. She went to Gu Shiran and pulled her collar down, second young master, look. This was given by her just now. It's swollen. Gu Shiran looked down and saw that her neck was red and swollen. He felt much heartache. The way he looked at that Nanny Guan was more unfathomable. Nanny Guan remembered that Gu Shiran had always been a softy who didn't care about the affairs of the world. She didn't expect that after not having seen him for a few years, he became strong and would cause people to feel fear. She was puzzled. When she saw that gaze look over, she didn't know why, but she shivered. She said nervously, second young master, why don't you first ask her how she had offended our miss? Gu Shiran tilted the corner of his lips slightly. He reached out and tidied Shu Huan's collar. He said faintly, she is asking me to ask you how you had offended that Miss Zhang. His tone was casual. There wasn't a trace of joy or anger in it, but the intimacy in those words was obvious. So, everyone's mind was filled with thoughts. Even Mei Jing, who just caught up and wanted to speak, closed her mouth. With second young master here, there was no need for her to meddle in. Chapter 72. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The perfect coordination. Shu Huan saw that the eyes of everyone was on her. She muttered to herself irresolutely. She decided to tell the truth. She didn't do that straight away, but turned and looked at Gu Shiran, second young master. Gu Shiran wanted to see how she would explain and made an sound without batting an eye. Shu Huan continued, I remember that you had said that the hot spring behind Japanese Rose Building was only dedicated for second young mistress's use, right? Even if fourth young master wanted to take bath, he had to go elsewhere. Gu Shiran nodded slightly, that's right. Hearing his answer, Nanny Guan was stunned. Shu Huan didn't bother with her and continued, Miss Zhang is a guest. Presumably, she still doesn't know this rule that you had set. As for me, I thought that second young mistress wasn't inside. There was obviously no one in the hot spring. I walked in and didn't expect to accidentally collide in with an honorable guest. People who didn't belong together, don't live together. The people of Zhang family had the same moral and conduct. She hadn't finished speaking yet when that Nanny Guan rushed to interrupt her. Since it was a hot spring only for second young mistress to use, why did you, a little maid, enter? Shu Huan smiled slightly. This nanny asked a good question. Why did I enter? Naturally, it's because second young mistress wants to take a bath and I went to clean up the hot spring. There are many flowers and plants in this yard. Who would know whether there would a gust of wind that would blow the fallen leaves and flowers into the hot spring? How can second young mistress take a bath then when it's so dirty? She finally told a lie, but she originally wasn't planning on revealing her identity. Moreover, when Gu Shiran questioned her, he intentionally or unintentionally regarded her as a little maid. He must have thought things through. She naturally would play along. Besides, this Nanny Guan's arrogance was because of her identity of a maid. It wasn't too good to contrast too much and disappoint people, right? Further thinking, the hot spring was originally to be cleaned up. Fortunately, it was her who barged in this time. She could still be safe and sound because she took advantage of her distinctive identity and Gu Shiran's protection. If it was some other maid that entered, did she had to watch her maid being punished for no reason at all by Zhang Hanfang? She naturally had to suppress their arrogance and let them know that being a guest at others' people's home, they shouldn't be the guest and act as a host. The more she talked, the expression of Nanny Guan changed even more. There was no other reason. She thought about Zhang Hanfang's maiden name and suspected that the fallen leaves and flowers that Shu Huan talked about was referring to another thing. It may even be pointing at the mulberry tree and curse the locust tree. However, she knew that these were just her speculation and it happened that Shu Huan's expression was calm. If she spoke about her speculation openly, people may think that she was narrow-minded and thought too much. Hence, she pressed down her anger and rebuked, your explanation seems reasonable. However, there must be someone keeping a watch outside when our miss is taking a bath. You are not blind. Could you have not seen her? And you still say that you barged in unintentionally. It could be seen that you are lying. Shu Huan lowered her head and said, you should ask Pei Yu about this. Your miss let her keep watch outside, only the heavens know what she went to do. Anyway, when I entered, there was no one keeping watch outside. Could you blame me for this? Nanny Guan wasn't present at that time and didn't know the ins and out of the matter. When she heard that, Shu Huan really didn't seem to be in the wrong. She was immediately at loss for words. Shu Huan then said to Gu Shiran, I already reported the matter clearly. It is my fault for colliding into Miss Zhang, but I know that second young master is the master. That was why I rushed back to receive punishment from you. I didn't expect to be cut off halfway by this nanny. Since this had happened, I asked second young master to name my crime and punishment, so I can go receive it. While Shu Huan spoke, Nanny Guan looked at Gu Shiran's expression. She was afraid that he wouldn't give face to Zhang household and let them have no way out of this embarrassment. She had some regret. Originally, when she saw her miss was so furious, she thought that it was a big deal. She didn't expect that it was such a trivial matter. It now looked like they made a big deal out of a small fuss. After Gu Shiran listened to Shu Huan, he very seriously thought about it for a moment. He had a tacit mutual understanding with Shu Huan and said, since it was unintentional, then you have no fault. Moreover, little cousin sister is not a narrow-minded person. She doesn't have the need to punish you over such a trivial matter. It would be alright if you just go apologize to her. Right, right. Nanny Guan got a way out of this embarrassment. She was relieved and said, our miss couldn't treat people more generously. It would be fine if you just go with me and apologize to her. Shu Huan raised her eyelashes, glanced timidly at her and shouted, Nanny Guan. Nanny Guan was flustered, what? Shu Huan muttered, I have already apologized to your miss, but miss looked very angry. She wanted me to kneel, kowtow 3 times and go receive 40 beatings from the housekeeper. Nanny Guan didn't know what to say. She could only blame herself for praising Zhang Hanfang too smoothly. Xu Huan saw that this slap was too heavy. She quickly handed her a leeway. I don't blame your miss for punishing too heavy, but even when a maid committed the crime of stealing or betraying her master, she would only be beaten 40 times and expelled. The two households have different rules for punishing servants. This troubled me. After thinking about it, I feel that I as a member of Gu household, I should follow the rules of Gu household. Does Nanny Guan think that there was something wrong with my line of thoughts? Nanny Guan's face was red and she humphed twice. It was hard to say that she, was right and that she wasn't right. Originally, when the play played till here, it would have been right to end it now. She didn't expect that a cold and arrogant voice interrupted. The voice from gnashed teeth could be heard, excuses. Xu Huan raised her head and saw that the main character had arrived with maid Peiyu. She didn't answer and stood there well-behavedly. The eyes looked at the nose pointed at the mouth and the mouth pointed at the chest. Gu Shiran answered faintly, it turned out to be little cousin sister. Long time no see. But, where do these words stem from? He had always been an invisible character at Gu household. Of course, he had no sense of existence in the eyes of relatives. Zhang Hanfang looked from the bottom of her heart down on this second big cousin brother. Hearing him ask her a question, she didn't even bother with him. Instead, she looked at Xu Huan and said, why don't you talk about what you plan to do by dressing up as a servant? Right. Peiyu arrived one step behind of Zhang Hanfang. Hence, she heard half of the conversation. Now, she took the opportunity to cause trouble for Xu Huan, what barging in unintentionally. I think you want to deliberately tarnish our Mrs. reputation. That was why you dressed up as a servant and barged into the hot spring. Xu Huan had seen shameless people, but she hadn't seen such shameless people. She, had turned the right and wrong upside down in a flash. Xu Huan couldn't help but criticize silently in her heart. This woman has a too serious princess syndrome. And also the paranoia that she was harmed. She, didn't know her at all. Even if she had nothing to do, she wouldn't rack her brains to design tricks on her. Those who handled the cinnabar were stained red, those who work with ink were stained black. After spending a long time with Gu Shiran, she would more or less be infected with some of his black-belly traits. Therefore, she cursed in her heart, but her face didn't reveal anything. She only calmly answered, Miss thinks too much. I dressed like a servant just to please my second young master. It truly has nothing to do with Miss. After this sentence was out, not only was Zhang Hanfang shocked, the imaginations of the others also began to run wild. Even Gu Shiran's face darkened instantly. Very good. This little girl had learned to defame him. What did she mean by pleasing my second young master? He didn't have such a special hobby. However, Gu Shiran's rank in black-belly was higher than hers and his skin was also thick as a city wall. After his expression darkened for a moment, he laughed as if nothing had happened. He looked at Zhang Hanfang and said, What, does little cousin sister have any opinions that I like to see her dressed in the clothes of a servant? Chapter 73 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeking justice. Those words of Gu Shiran were very crafty. No matter how Zhang Hanfang answered, it was inappropriate for an unmarried girl to talk about the amorous feelings between men and women. Her face turned red. She fiercely glared at them once, turned and walked away. Nanny Guan felt dull and was also embarrassed to continue to stay here. She called the two guards who looked at each other in dismay and followed behind Zhang Hanfang. Only Peiyu dilly-dallied and didn't want to leave because she knew that her miss had lost face here and would certainly vent her anger on her, when they go back. She felt very uneasy. Wait. Just when everyone thought that the matter would end like this, Gu Shiran suddenly opened his mouth. Xu Huan looked surprised at him. She didn't know what he wanted to do. Zhang Hanfang was also puzzled, but she still proudly turned, raised her chin and said with ridicule, "What advice does second big cousin brother still want to give me? I don't dare to give advice," but, Gu Shiran's eyes lowered and locked at Shu Huan's neck. He said faintly, she had offended little cousin's sister and had apologized. Then, shouldn't little cousin sister's nanny be accountable for hitting her? He originally didn't want to make a big fuss. However, with his identity as Gu household's legitimate son, he could do more as his pleases than Shu Huan. Hence, there was also a limit to his tolerance. There was no reason to see his wife being humiliated and not do anything. Zhang Hanfang didn't expect that he would come up for a maid. She was very surprised. Then, she got angry. Then, what about that she hit my maid? Gu Shiran didn't look at her and asked Shu Huan, "Did you hit her maid?" Answering second young master. Shu Huan lowered her eyes and said with reverence and respect, "It was Mrs. Maid who wanted to hit me. I only dodged a bit." Only now did Gu Shiran looked up at Zhang Hanfang, "Did you hear?" "Nonsense," Zhang Hanfang said angrily. "I obviously saw that she reached her leg out to trip Peiyu." Gu Shiran looked at Peiyu, "Really?" Peiyu saw that there was hope and nodded quickly. "Did you fall?" Peiyu went blank for a moment and said, "No." "Then, is there any injury on your body?" Her voice lowered, "No." Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow, "Is this also called being hit?" As he said that, he pointed at the bruised and swollen fingerprints on Shu Huan's neck. He smiled faintly and said, "We have evidence. If you don't believe it, why don't you let Nanny Guan compare the fingerprints? The 5 fingers would certainly not be too long or too short and no more or less." The 4 words, "no more or less," caused Shu Huan to almost laugh out loud. It wasn't easy to hold in. With blame, she casted a glance at him to let this old man to stop spoofing. Gu Shiran looked laughingly at her and continued, "Come, come, come. Nanny Guan, reach out your hand to compare, otherwise my little cousin's sister would think that I accused you wrongly." Nanny Guan had long become the color of a pig liver. She helplessly said to Zhang Hanfang, "Miss, just now, I really hit." Zhang Hanfang gritted her teeth from anger. However, being pressed like this by Gu Shiran, she couldn't pull down her face to elude. She said with hate, "Then, what do you want?" Gu Shiran seemed very good-tempered and pushed off, "Nanny Guan is little cousin sister's nanny ever since young. How would it be reasonable for me deal with? It's better for little cousin sister to handle it yourself." Zhang Hanfang had been spoiled since young. She had never experienced such awkwardness and embarrassment. If it wasn't because she was strong-minded and she endured with gritted teeth, her tears would have fallen. At this moment, she felt defeated. How would she still have the mind to dispute and bargain with Gu Shiran for her nanny? She only wanted to escape this humiliation sooner. She raised her hand and fiercely slapped Nanny Guan's face. Then, she provocatively raised her head and asked arrogantly, "Is it enough like this?" She didn't feel ashamed for having hit her nanny and instead used that to demonstrate against him. How arrogant and devoid of emotions did one have to be able to do such a thing? Gu Shiran shook his head. He originally just wanted to make her embarrassed for a short moment and take revenge for Shu Huan, but when her slap fell, he discovered that he had underestimated her ruthlessness. The funny thing was, what does Nanny Guan had to do with him? Even if she was slapped 2 more times, it was irrelevant to him. She obviously put her provocation on the wrong place. Zhang Hanfang misunderstood the meaning behind the reason he shook his head and coldly said, "What, not enough?" Enough, Gu Shiran wasn't interested in playing with an arrogant and willful girl. He casually said, "I originally thought that it would be enough if Nanny Guan apologized. I didn't expect that little cousin sister is so fair. A slap for a slap. No one suffered loss. It wasn't just not losing, they even earned. Both got slapped. One got slapped on the neck and the other on the face, but the meaning was completely different." The later was extraordinary shame and humiliation. From the strength that Zhang Hanfang used, presumably Nanny Guan wouldn't be able to come out and face people for several days. After Zhang Hanfang heard that, she could hold back anymore. The tears tumbled down. While crying, she said through gritted teeth, "Gu Shiran, you are intentionally bullying me. You are not a man." The laughter in Gu Shiran's eyes turned cold. "What, would one be considered man by cowardly fawning upon you while you are being so rude and unreasonable? Besides, I only sought justice after one was bullied by you. Everyone present is a witness. You are the one who slapped your nanny. You lost face because of your own doing. I wouldn't dare to accept the word bully. It's better that I return it to you." After he said that, he grabbed Xu Huan's waist and walked away. Mei Jing looked at this one and then looked at that one. She also slipped away. This Miss Zhang's temper was even more arrogant than fourth young master. If she slipped away a bit later, wouldn't she, HCF, just look for any fault and beat her to death? It was safer to follow second young master. In the end, even Zhang Hanfang's finishing blow of throwing her sleeve and leave had been snatched by Gu Shiran. She suffocated on her anger, lost her voice and choked with sobs. She picked up a stone and threw it at Gu Shiran's back. She said with hate, "You are something. Wait and see." The stone hit a parasol tree, bounced back and disappeared into the darkness. Gu Shiran tightened his hold on Xu Huan, lowered his head and laughed. "Did you hear her threat?" Xu Huan sighed, "I heard it. What do you feel?" Xu Huan looked at the sky and said, "Too childish. Even her threat is so shallow and not novel." Right, Gu Shiran nodded while feeling similar. "Then, we can completely ignore her in the future." Xu Huan looked up at him. This person's expression was very calm. There wasn't any trace of pride and the meaning to show off. Thinking about it again, his statement seemed to be a fact, and it also reminded her that while dealing with someone like Zhang Hanfang who liked to make trouble without reason, the best way wasn't to fight an eye for an eye. If she did that, Zhang Hanfang would bear grudges against her and the matter would become bigger. The best way was to ignore her. She would stop when she feels that she was being a clown. But then again, Gu Shiran obviously knew this, and he still couldn't hold back from teaching Zhang Hanfang a lesson. In fact, this guy was more arrogant than Zhang Hanfang and belonged to the class of people who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. It seemed that she has to be careful to not offend him in the future. Otherwise, she wouldn't even know how she had died. While she secretly thought about things, she couldn't help but cast more glances at Gu Shiran and she subconsciously wanted to stay a bit farther away from him. The result was that she was immediately noticed. The sound of laughter being suppressed sounded in her ears. "You are afraid of me. What a joke. How could that be?" She obviously appeared fierce while cowardly at heart. "Since you are not afraid of me, then, think about how to requite me. Just now, I took revenge for you, oh. Alright, she was wrong. Gu Shiran's greatest trait wasn't being fearful but it was being hateful. Chapter 74. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Stealing a kiss, she found another hot spring and cleaned her whole body. Xu Huan was so sleepy that she didn't eat. The moment she returned to her room and touched her bed, she fell asleep. As for the requite that Gu Shiran talked about, she had long completely forgotten about it in her extreme sleepiness. Only she had forgotten it, but there was someone who hadn't. Gu Shiran returned to the room in high spirits to collect his debt. The result was that he saw Xu Huan sleeping soundly while holding the blanket. His smiling face immediately sank beyond the mark. Originally, he wanted to see her red face from being in panic and in a predicament. Now, he couldn't see anything because she was asleep. He couldn't bear to wake her up after seeing her sleep so soundly, but not waking her up, he would feel dejected. Gu Shiran stood silently under the light of the lamp for a moment. Suddenly, he felt that his worry about his gains and losses and his hesitation was very funny. He shook his head, blew out the light on the wind, took off his outer clothing and went to bed. The night of the summer was stuffy. The window of the room was half opened. There was a green gauze in front of the window. The moonlight penetrated inside through the green gauze and spread a fine silver light on the floor. His eyes had adapted to the darkness. Gu Shiran was able to use the glimmer of the moonlight to look at Shu Huan's sleeping face that was gentle and peaceful. He couldn't help himself from using his index finger to touch the outline of her face. When his fingertip stopped at her slightly pouted lips that was soft like petals, he unexpectedly became fond of that unique sensation and didn't want to withdraw his finger. Such a contact was light. Shu Huan was sleeping soundly and didn't feel anything. However, when he couldn't help himself from using his fingertip to gently rub her lips, she frowned slightly. Gu Shiran didn't know what kind of mentality he had. Anyway, he felt that it was interesting when she frowned and got angry. It was like looking at a baby trying to pretend to be calm and serious. There was a kind of intense and comical contrast. Every time, it would give him the urge to take her into his arms and pamper her. There hadn't been many opportunities and now, the time was right and the conditions were favorable. His heart and mind were at war. The strength of the fingertip rubbing her lips couldn't help but become greater. In her dreams, Shu Huan felt that there was a bug crawling back and forth on her lips. She was stirred into impatience. She couldn't help but sweep with her hand, turned her body and muttered, "Hateful." Gu Shiran was startled and then he smiled. She was originally sleeping facing upwards while holding the quilt like a big tortoise whose 4 legs faced the sky. Now, she slept with her face facing him. Her body curled up like a languid and lovely cat. A tenderness that was like water overflew over him. It entangled his heart soft like silk, leaving no more gap in his heart. He emptied his mind and no longer thought about anything. He obeyed his instinctive reaction and desire. He pulled away the quilt in Shu Huan's arms and took her in his arms. The faint fragrance of her hair mixed with her seemingly non-existent body odor was like the refreshing and pleasant scent of early summer. Gu Shiran tightened his embrace. He had already lost too many things, but as long as he could hold her tightly, it was as if he owned the world. Shu Huan didn't like to not hold on to anything when she was sleeping. Hence, when he pulled away the quilt, she naturally reached out and held his neck. Then, she twisted her body twice and went more into his arms. Sound asleep, she continued her beautiful dream. There was an idiom that could describe her actions to the fullest. Throw oneself in somebody's arms. But why was she throwing herself in his arms while being asleep? Gu Shiran's body stiffened. He felt that it was funny. Originally, he wanted to secretly take some advantage of her while she was sleeping. The result was that he let himself feel uncomfortable and embarrassed. He subconsciously touched his nose. Fortunately, he didn't exaggerate to the point of having a nosebleed. However, when he looked at her quiet sleeping face, he felt dejected. This was too unfair. She was sleeping sweetly there while his blood vessels swelled wide. Immediately afterwards, he got mischievous thoughts. He probed her waist and gently drew circles with his fingertip. Shu Huan's body immediately trembled and vaguely muttered, "Itchy." Gu Shiran endured his laughter. His 5 fingers went back and forth on her waist. Shu Huan didn't wake up, but when one was being harassed in the dream, the body would have a natural reaction. Suddenly, there was the sound of her giggling. Then, she turned her body and slapped away that disturbing hand of Gu Shiran. She also muttered, "Itchy. Don't." Afraid that he wouldn't get to play anymore if he woke her up, he hugged her well-behavedly for a moment. He only rubbed her hair gently with his lips. He felt a tingling sensation, but after a while, he remembered that her neck was swollen because of Nanny Guan's slap. He couldn't help but caress it while he felt heartache. He didn't expect that Shu Huan just happened to twist her body to change her sleeping position. The gently caress became a heavy touch, making her frown and said, "Pain." The word pain was said louder than her mutterings of before. It startled Gu Shiran. He thought she was woken up by him. He quickly retrieved his hand. However, she just said that and didn't wake up from her sleep. He didn't know what she was dreaming about, but her eyebrows gradually unfrowned. A smile also gradually appeared on her face. Sleeping so soundly. Truly a pig. Gu Shiran didn't know whether he was glad or disappointed. He lowered his eyes and saw that her lips were at hand. He couldn't help himself from putting his lips on her lips and nibbled them. Shu Huan muttered something he couldn't understand. Gu Shiran began to bite her lips gently and nibbled slowly on them. It was extremely gently and lingering. But when the kiss deepened, he gradually couldn't control his desire and he even deliberately wanted to wake her up. Hence, the strength he kissed her with became greater. From gentle, the kiss became wantonly brash. Half his body also pressed her. He really wanted to kiss and embrace her like this for the whole life without letting go. The kiss was too passionate. Even in her dreams, Shu Huan felt that her body was turning hot and her chest stuffy. She was a bit breathless. However, her sleepiness was too deep and glued her consciousness together. No matter what, she couldn't break free from the darkness. She couldn't open her eyes even when she was caught between sweetness and pain. Both of them were in the state of extreme struggle. Gu Shiran was indulged in the sea of his desires, and Shu Huan was trapped in the deep sleepiness that she couldn't escape from. The struggling seemed to have lasted for a long time and it also seemed short like just a moment. Shu Huan suddenly reached out to push the big stone that pressed on her body and made her suffocate. She immediately felt light again and her breathing was extremely comfortable. However, the good times didn't last long. The big stone seemed to have grown hands and feet and tried hard to climb on her. Naturally, she didn't want to be pressed again. Hence, she kicked very hard with her leg. Gu Shiran was originally already squeezed to the side of the bed by her. After being kicked by her, he fell. After a sound, Shu Huan was shocked and slightly opened her eyes. However, she only saw the faint moonlight coming through the window. Then, the consciousness that she hadn't recovered yet had been taken away again by her deep sleepiness. She continued to sleep. After a short while, a white figure climbed up in a sorry state from under the bed. Damn, Gu Shiran rubbed his forehead. He looked at the deeply asleep Shu Huan and felt that even scolding her for being slow like a pig, it would be an insult to the pig. Chapter 75. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Teal note. Only 2 chapters this week because of the stressful exams. Persevering face. Chapter 75 doesn't remember anything. It's too shameful to be kicked out of bed. When Gu Shiran lay on bed again, he was choked with gloominess. He was even doubting whether Shu Huan was pretending to be asleep. Otherwise, that kick wouldn't come at such a bad timing. If it wasn't because he had to dodge, he might have not fallen out of the bed. He looked at her from all sides, but couldn't find any signs of her pretending to be sleeping. He could only take it that he was out of luck. He was a bit angry. He wasn't angry that Shu Huan didn't let him take advantage. He was angry that even in her sleep she was subconsciously rejecting his touch. Could this be her true feelings towards him? Gu Shiran's face darkened completely after just pondering about it for a short moment. It happened that the one beside him was ignorant of all of these, making it that while he felt that she was very hateful, he also felt helpless. In the end, he could only loathingly reach out his hand, strongly held her waist and pull her over to hold her while he slept. Poor Shu Huan didn't know that someone tossed and turned her while she was in the land of dreams. The most pitiful thing was that she didn't know that Gu Shiran already labeled her with the tags, pig, and, waiting to be slaughtered. Because she slept while being hungry, she was gnawing on a pig's trotter in her dreams. She didn't know that she had become a pig's trotter just now and had been gnawed by someone for a long while. This night was destined to be dejected. Aside from Shu Huan who was in a deep sleep, many people couldn't sleep soundly this night. There was no need to mention Gu Shiran's intertwining. Concubine Yun had been idle recently and had the habit of taking a nap. She didn't sleep so early in the night. She was admiring the moon with a few maids and cool off in a shade. They faintly heard some of the tossing movements in Shu Huan's room. Especially that word, pain, couldn't help but let people's imagination run wild. Naturally, she couldn't sleep while thinking about it. Zhang Hanfang had lost face in front of so many people. After returning, she wrote a big Gu Shiran on a rice paper. Because she didn't know the 8 birthday characters of Gu Shiran, she estimated them and then threw the rice paper at Nanny Guan to let her fiercely beat it. Nanny Guan's face was swollen like a pig's head and still had to beat the villain with the sole of the shoe. She couldn't speak up about her hardship. Dnav Om, the unluckiest one, was presumably Peiyu. Zhang Hanfang vented all her anger on her. Although, she, ZHF, didn't expel and sold her, but she, ZHF, let her suffer 20 beatings, retrieved her identity as a personal maid and dispatched her to do heavy manual work. The sun rose and the moon had disappeared. It was a new day again. Shu Huan woke up early in the morning. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Gu Shiran was still asleep, but his forehead was bruised. It was like someone hit him with a brick. She couldn't help but wonder. She pushed him and said, "Wake up, what happened to your forehead?" Gu Shiran had been awakened by her push. He opened her eyes and looked at her. Then, he turned and went back to sleep. She still had the face to ask. Could it be she truly didn't feel anything last night? "Hey, wake up." Shu Huan pushed him once again, but this person threw a fit and pretended to sleep. She got up, opened the door and called Mei Jing to bring the water to wash up. The strange thing was that Mei Jing seemed to be in a very good mood. She kept laughing when she looked at her, When she, met her, puzzled eyes, she, pretended that nothing was the matter and lowered her eyes. She even brought one more basin of water to wash up. Shu Huan laughed and said, "Second young master is still sleeping. Why did you bring 2 basins of water?" Mei Jing's answer was even more strange, "Second young mistress is not going to use it." "Me." Shu Huan touched her face. "My face isn't so dirty, right? Do I have to use 2 basins of water?" Mei Jing's tongue was tied. In the end, she didn't say anything and brought 1 basin of water out. When she came back again, Shu Huan couldn't help but frown slightly. "What is going on? Your mind seemed to be elsewhere today." It's nothing." Mei Jing handed her the toothbrush to block her, doubts. However, after being silent for a while, she couldn't help herself and said, "Second young mistress must have been tired last night. You should have rested more. Why did you wake up so early in the morning?" Shu Huan was unconcerned. She rinsed her mouth and washed her face with a fragrant soap. After she had washed, she said, "Last night, I slept early. When I woke up, I remembered that I still needed to handle many matters. So, I got up." Mei Jing lowered her head and muttered, "The body is more important. If there is something, second young mistress can just call us. Why bother to do it yourself?" Shu Huan saw that her expression was strange and became more confused. "Are you keeping something from me?" "No. Don't say no. You are not someone who can hide things. I can already see it." Shu Huan interrupted her. "What is going on?" Mei Jing hesitated for a long time before she said with the voice of a mosquito, "In fact, it's nothing. It's just that last night that we all heard it." Shu Huan stared at her blankly. "What did you hear?" The movements in your room." After Mei Jing said this sentence stuttering, her face reddened. This was not something she, a maid, should say. Even if she had heard it, she should have pretended as if she heard nothing. However, Shu Huan had always been good to her. Hence, she also felt close to Xu Huan and would concern herself with Xu Huan's matters. Moreover, being maid was a low life. It was impossible for them to not understand the affairs of life like unmarried girls. Before being sent to Plum Flower Pavilion to serve Xu Huan, Lin Shi let an old maid teach her about the matters of the bedroom. Therefore, she and Liangchen understood a bit more than Xiaoyun and Huiyun, who had been serving Gu Shiran from before he married. This bit more of understanding let her see that Xu Huan and Gu Shiran haven't consummated their marriage. She was also puzzled. She would have let the matter go if second young master didn't like second young mistress. However, the two people were obviously very close. Why haven't they consummated their marriage? The only explanation was probably that second young master's body wasn't well. This was something she had no power over. She could only worry for second young mistress in secret. She didn't expect that she unexpectedly heard some movements last night. She thought that the rice finally became cooked rice. She felt relieved for Xu Huan and couldn't help but beam with joy. While she was being shy and happy, Xu Huan was confused. The movements in my room. Last night, I fell asleep the moment I touched the bed. I didn't hear anything. Right. Did that Miss Zhang come with people to cause trouble? When I woke up, I saw that second young master's forehead is bruised. I was about to ask you. Mei Jing went blank after hearing her say that and said, Miss Zhang. She hasn't been here. Xu Huan was also surprised. Then, where does the bruise of his forehead come from? Mei Jing shook her head, I don't know. When the two people were staring at each other, they heard a chuckle. Gu Shiran raised the canopy and sat up. His shoulders shook slightly. It was obvious that he was trying hard to hold his laughter. You both are talking about different things and actually could talk for so long. He truly couldn't hold it in any longer. Just now, he was pretending to sleep. Firstly, he was throwing a fit because he had lost face. Secondly, it was because he felt that even if Xu Huan was asleep, she should at least have a vague impression about what had happened last night. He wanted to see how she would react. He didn't expect that she didn't remember anything and asked Mei Jing how he injured his forehead. It truly made him helpless and also feel some disappointment. Why couldn't she remember it? Chapter 76. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The resentment Mei Jing saw that Gu Shiran had woken up and thought about how he heard everything that she had just said. She was very embarrassed, screamed once and fled the scene. Xu Huan still didn't know what was wrong. She felt more confused after being laughed at by Gu Shiran. Although, she was confused, but the object that was being ridiculed was herself. She still felt embarrassed. Her face slowly reddened. She said through gritted teeth, what did I say wrong? What's so funny about it? When Gu Shiran heard that, the laughter that he barely held in became reckless again. He laughed so hard that Xu Huan was about to throw a vase at him. He barely held back his laughter and pointed at his forehead. Do you want to know how this bruise came to be? Xu Huan nodded. Gu Shiran put on the outer clothing, got up and left a sentence, you hit me. Ah. Xu Huan's first reaction was. Nonsense. I was obviously asleep. How can I hit you? Even if she had the heart to hit him, she didn't have the gut to. When she went to bed in the past, she had to hold a copper incense burner. That was also a bluff. She really couldn't throw that heavy stuff on Gu Shiran's head. Gu Shiran smiled and casted her a sidelong glance. He didn't explain. When he was at the door, he shouted, Mei Jing, where did you run to? Quickly bring the water for me to wash up. Afterwards, no matter how Xu Huan asked, Gu Shiran just looked at her and smiled. He resolutely refused to tell her the details about his humiliation. She could only frown and guess about what had happened. The key was the movements in the room that Mei Jing mentioned and the bruise on Gu Shiran's forehead that was said to be caused by her and also 2 basins of water to wash up Mei Jing's amorous performance. In the era that Xu Huan lived in the past, it was very difficult to find someone completely ignorant of sexual relationships. Naturally, she was also not innocent to that point. Therefore, the more she thought about it, the more her expression darkened. No matter how she deducted, it would develop in the direction that was not suitable for children. But she obviously didn't feel any abnormality with her body. What drove her mad was that she didn't remember anything. She only knew that the moment she lay on bed last night, she fell asleep. When she opened her eyes, the sky had become bright. If something really had happened that was not suitable for children, she couldn't be in such a deep sleep that she didn't feel anything. Moreover, when she looked at Gu Shiran's action, she knew that the matter wouldn't be like that. He didn't show that he had any guilty conscience and only showed weirdness. Thousands of small hands seemed to be scratching her heart. The feeling of being kept in the dark was truly uncomfortable. In the end, she caught Mei Jing and interrogated her, "What kind of movements was there in my room last night? Tell me in details." Mei Jing looked at her expression and knew that she had to answer. She braced herself and said, "Second young mistress said that it was very itchy." Itchy? Were there mosquitoes? Second young mistress said no. Xu Huan looked very suspiciously at her. Did she, sh really say that? The last sentence came. Mei Jing said awkwardly, second young mistress also shouted pain. Why did it feel amorous, like she welcomed her desires when she listened to that? Xu Huan was completely speechless. She raised her head, looked at the sky and muttered, "The sky is so bright." Although, Mei Jing didn't know why she suddenly cared about the weather, but she still blurted, "Right, ah. Today, concubine Yun even said to take out the clothes to let them dry in the sun." Xu Huan didn't listen to what she was saying. She only continued to mutter to herself, "It would be great if it rains." Mei Jing asked puzzled, "Why? Does second young mistress think that the weather is too hot?" "No," Xu Huan said dejected. "If it rained, then there will be a thunder to simply kill me with a strike." While talking, she covered her face with both hands. No matter what had happened last night, in short, she had lost a very big face because Mei Jing had said. "We have all heard it." This was a sentence that made her very resentful. The whole morning, Xu Huan closed herself in her room and refused to go out. She also didn't go ask Gu Shiran. She only looked at him with that gaze full of resentment that followed him like a shadow. The time to burn an incense stick, the time to make tea, an hour had passed. Gu Shiran, whose face had always been thick as a city wall and who would be unperturbed at all times, finally, he was crushed under her gaze. He wiped the sweat on his forehead, faked 2 coughs and said, "I will go to Du Qiu's." His forefoot just stepped out in a sorry state. Mei Jing came in and persuaded her, "Second young mistress, the weather is so good. Don't stuff yourself in the room. Let's go out to relieve boredom." Usually, she wouldn't try to persuade Xu Huan like this. However, Xu Huan's mood was obviously gloomy. This terrified her and made her think that she said too much before. Now, she was trying her best to make up. "Go out." Xu Huan bent over the table and narrowed her eyes. She said, "It's enough if I just throw my face in the room." Mei Jing lowered her head in sadness, "It's all my fault. I talked too much." "It's not your fault," Xu Huan bit her teeth secretly. She could only blame Gu Shiran. Surely, he must have messed around with her last night. Otherwise, how would she say such strange things in her dreams? However, even if she was gloomy, she still did the things she had to do. She thought for a moment and said, "Go inquire about the movements of Miss Zhang and then go to Bamboo Pavilion to see how the injury of the girl that I brought back yesterday is. If Dr. Ji says that she could be moved, then let 2 people carry her to Japanese Rose Building and let her live with you in your room." When Mei Jing saw that she wasn't angry at her, her mood brightened. She promised and went out. Xu Huan said behind her, "If you see Ranmo, let him come over." After Mei Jing left, she was alone in the room. She had nothing to do. Remembering the aromatic herbs she brought back from the mountain, she took them out and sorted them. Fortunately, they had dried these aromatic herbs on the mountain. Hence, even when they had been enclosed for a night, they didn't go bad. There was still a faint aroma on them. Just when she wanted to go find brush and paper, suddenly a strange feeling entered her heart. Only when she thought carefully about it, she remembered that it was Gu Shiran who let her sort these aromatic herbs. Immediately, she threw the aromatic herbs on the ground as if she had been bitten by a snake. She didn't have the hobby to abuse herself. Why, after she had lost her face, she would gladly and diligently help Gu Shiran do things. However, when she lifted her feet to stomp these aromatic herbs, she hesitated again. She felt that it wasn't very good to vent her anger on the innocent aromatic herbs. Besides, these things may be very useful. If these things were ruined by her in a fit of anger, perhaps she would botch things up. Thinking it through, Shu Huan wanted to cover her face and cry again. She hated her lack of toughness and decisive personality. No matter what, she couldn't go to the extremes while doing things. Now, thinking about it, Zhang Hanfang who she met last night was living more to her, ZHF, heart's desires than her, SH. However, if this living more to one's heart desires was established by trampling the pride and even the life of others and reveal one's repulsive countenance, then, she would prefer to not live as her heart desires. Chapter 77 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Skillfully deflected when Mei Jing returned, Shu Huan was slouching dispirited on the table. She was drawing the aromatic herbs on a bamboo paper with a charcoal strip. She really couldn't let herself be idle. If she had nothing to do, her whole body would feel uncomfortable. Moreover, she just peeved for a moment and didn't intend to fall out with Gu Shiran. Since drawing later or sooner was the same, she compromised without any backbone. However, the charcoal strip she found wasn't as easy to use as those used in professional paintings. It was better than nothing. Anyway, she was just using the charcoal strip to make a sketch. Perhaps, she would need to add color later. She didn't need to be too particular. The bamboo paper was very light and delicate. It was much more suitable to draw this kind of archives than cooked paper. Shu Huan didn't raise her head when she heard Mei Jing enter. She continued to sketch. After waiting for a while, she still didn't hear anything from Mei Jing. She became a bit puzzled. She looked up and asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" Mei Jing still didn't know that she knew how to paint. At this moment, she was enthralled. Hearing the question, she stuck her tongue out and said, "Second young mistress is truly capable. You know how to read, how to carve things, and now you even know how to paint. Is there anything in this world that you don't know how to do?" Shu Huan laughed. "There are many things that I don't know. Zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. I don't know the first three." She was worried about this. It seemed that when she learned how to paint from Ji Danqing, she should also practice her calligraphy. She didn't hope that she would write too well. As long as it wouldn't be too shameful when she signs her paintings, she would be happy. After the two chatted for a moment, Mei Jing reported the incident that Pei Yu had been beaten and also said, "I originally thought that after Miss Zhang suffered so much at second young master's hand, she would have left the resort. I didn't expect that early in the morning, she sent people to go get things at Zhang residence. She said that she wanted to stay here for a few more days and isn't in a hurry to go back." Shu Huan was a bit surprised, but then she realized. Zhang Hanfang was proud and arrogant. How could she leave the matter at that after having suffered such a hard blow? That she stayed was nothing more than for her to seek revenge. No need to bother with her. Pass on my word. Let the maids and manservants of the resort be more careful. If there is nothing, don't go to heavily scented building. If they encountered the people of Zhang family, let them be more respectful. Don't slack on etiquettes to let people grab onto our shortcomings. By then, it would be getting a fight from them because of nothing. Mei Jing agreed and said, "I also have been to Dr. G's. He said that the girl got a fever last night. She hasn't awakened yet. It was better for her to stay at Bamboo Pavilion and it is more appropriate for him to look after her. Xu Huan frowned, is her life at risk? Mei Jing shook her head and said, Dr. Ji said that there was no problem temporarily, but the weather is too hot. The wound may deteriorate. If pus formed again, it would be a bit dangerous. Xu Huan thought for a moment and said, let housekeeper Zhao open the ice house and bring ice to Bamboo Pavilion 3 times a week. Also, let the kitchen prepare different kinds of sweet porridge and light soup and send them to Bamboo Pavilion. Oh, right. If Dr. Ji needs to use some herbs, let him bring me the prescription. I will let people go buy the herbs for him. This slave will remember, Mei Jing said laughingly. However, Ranmo went out early in the morning. I don't know when he will be back. I could only pass some words to Dian to let him come over to here the moment he returns. Xu Huan smiled slightly at her, not bad. It seemed that you are quite capable. Mei Jing was a bit shy after being praised by her. She lowered her head and said a bit shy, I'm not worthy of being praised by second young mistress. These are things that I should do. They were talking here when concubine Yun who was standing outside the curtain and heard it all. She didn't eavesdrop intentionally. She came over to report things and heard the talk. Hearing Xu Huan assign the tasks without any disorder, her heart felt empty. She couldn't tell what kind of feeling that was. You have to know that she was in charge of these trivial matters 1 month ago. Later, she saw that Gu Shiran intentionally or unintentionally pushed these things bit by bit to Xu Huan. Hence, she simply let go. Firstly, it was to get into Gu Shiran's good graces and also to show that she didn't have any intention to fight for power. Secondly, it was because she wanted to see whether this second young mistress would become a joke without her to lead here. Only now, after hearing that, did she got to know that this second young mistress who didn't want to take on responsibilities and was too impatient to bother with the affairs, was meticulous. Concubine Yun sighed in secret. And, when she thought about last night's incidents, she couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. It wouldn't be long before her existence would be dispensable. While she was thinking, she saw Mei Jing raise the curtain and came out. After she, saw her, she quickly shouted, Concubine Yun. Concubine Yun nodded and walked in through the curtain that she, had set up. After she paid her respects to Xu Huan, she said, yesterday was too busy. I forgot to report to second young mistress that young master and Miss Zhang came 2 days ago to the resort to spend the summer vacation. Miss Zhang is staying at heavily scented building. Young Master Zhang went to visit friends and hadn't returned yet. Does second young mistress want to go meet her? Last night, she already met her. She truly had an imposing manner of influential family. Xu Huan said faintly, I'm tired and her mood is presumably also not good. Let's talk about it after a few days. Concubine Yun went blank for a moment and then continued, this time Miss Zhang sent a maid over and said that Pei Yu did wrong and had been punished. Nanny Guan isn't feeling well. Miss lacked people to serve her. She wanted to borrow a maid from second young mistress. She also mentioned that she wanted the maid that bumped into her last night. That maid didn't say clearly who it was, and I also don't know who they wanted. I had to come ask second young mistress. No one mentioned the incident of last night to concubine Yun. So, she was also baffled when she had to pass this message. She intuitively knew that there must be something she didn't know about. However, the dealings and interaction between families had always been difficult. It was not worthwhile to do such strenuous and unrewarding task. It was better to throw it at Xu Huan to let her, deal with it. After Xu Huan heard that, she revealed a self-mocking smile. She didn't expect that the maid role she occasionally played would let Zhang Hanfang miss and think about it so much. Thinking till here, she stabilized her mind and said, tell that maid. The person that her miss wants had been sent back to Gu residence by second young master early in morning. When concubine Yun heard this, she wanted to say something, but Shu Huan gestured to stop her. She, continued, moreover, the two young masters came to spend the summer here. They wouldn't stay here for a long time. Hence, they didn't bring too many people. The rest are maids that do heavy manual work. They don't know the etiquettes, are clumsy and wouldn't be able to serve her well. Therefore, I will not send them over, and if that made Miss Zhang angry, there are some old maids that are idle. If Miss Zhang doesn't mind, I will send them to heavily scented building and let Miss pick the ones she likes. After she said that, she looked at concubine Yun. Did you memorize it? Concubine Yun didn't know the reason why she arranged it like this, but when she saw that Shu Huan couldn't be refuted, she nodded, turned and went to tell the maid. Shu Huan sat there and stared at the slightly moving curtain in daze. So be it. She refuted Zhang Hanfang's unreasonable request and handed her a ladder to let her climb down. Anyway, while knowing that she was so arrogant, there was no reason to send a maid over to let her scold and beat. As for those old maids, they had spent a lot time in the residence and had long become very smart people. Moreover, every day they had nothing better to do. When they were idle, they relied on their identities of elders to scold everyone everywhere. It was very annoying. So, she simply sent them over to let Zhang Hanfang pick. When strong people meet, it was still unknown to whom the deer falls. However, she predicted the victory flag would be on those old maids who had rich experience and were skilled in schemes. Perhaps, they could even coax Zhang Hanfang into being docile, be good-tempered and take them as good people. She couldn't help but laugh while thinking about it. Truly wicked people would have wicked people to deal with.